the contract with the Big 12, and you're going to be able to speak much better to this than I am, Jason, has Texas and Oklahoma officially tied to the Big 12 to the point where that they would be free to start playing in the SEC in the 2025-26 sports calendar year. That's legally right this second, but there's a whole lot that could happen that could obviously change that.
Yeah, absolutely. From a legal perspective, to your point, Mark, with the SEC announcement yesterday, they had mentioned as of, I believe it was July 1st, 2025, Oklahoma and Texas have been invited to be a member of the Southeastern Conference. And then certainly everybody has said, what legally they're required to say at this point, which says, even Oklahoma and Texas said that today in their release, of accepting the invitation to the Southeastern Conference, is that as of July 1st, 2025, Oklahoma and Texas will be, members of the SEC. However, I think we all kind of have an understanding that it's probably not going to last that long. Specifically, I don't think anyone actually thinks it'll last till 2025. Especially with what happened with the Big 12 a couple of days ago in regards to the cease and desist letter, and then ESPN responding back and basically saying, no, we're not doing any of this thing, and we all know that they are, but just to what extent are they? So I think the most interesting part of this I guess saga, so to speak, Mark, is really just kind of understanding how long it's going to take. There's a decent amount of things that have to be in place for Oklahoma and Texas to be able to compete next year. There's the grant of rights, obviously, that TV contract, which is partly with Fox, partly with ESPN, that extends into the 2025 season, and then there's the part of what does the Big 12 do moving forward. I think it's going to be so intriguing to honestly see who blinks first, right? Does the SEC and ESPN blink first in terms of thinking, okay, the Big 12's they're going to stay together, they're not going to essentially break up, and we're going to have to work with Oklahoma and Texas and the SEC in terms of how does this payout make its way to the Big 12. There's been some talk, specifically from some of the Texas insiders, that have said ESPN still owes Texas in the neighborhood of $150 million for the remaining 10 years of the SEC of the Longhorn Network agreement. I think part of the decision making behind the scenes was Texas agreed to kind of get rid of that, to get rid of the Longhorn Network. Number one, to get admittance into the SEC, because the SEC wouldn't let that fly, to have the Longhorn Network stay. So I think part of that is a negotiator, that probably the Big 12 and the SEC obviously knows that they have that over their head in terms of they could pull that trigger almost any time that they wanted and just essentially write a check to Bob Bowlesby and say, okay, we've paid the 100, and I think, I don't know the specific details of it, but I think it's around 160 million that Oklahoma and Texas would have to pay in order to buy out of the remaining, which would be 3 years in terms of that agreement. So, however, I know that if the SEC, the Big 12, the SEC and the SEC network, and specifically the Longhorn Network and Oklahoma and Texas as a whole, if they can find a way for that conference to implode before that happens, obviously that's the best case scenario. So I think it's just going to be really interesting to see, does the rest of the Big 12, because they are very united right now. The ADs had a meeting even this morning, and the sentiment through that meeting was that they are very united in keeping this conference strong for the foreseeable future. And that's easy to say right now. However, panic a lot of time overweighs logic. So when you understand, moving forward, the Big 12 and the ESPN's a little bit at odds, what does that look like for, broadcasting rights in the near future? Even, Mark, as much as this year, when these games are picked, how many how many games each single, they've already done this, for the first month of the season, the broadcasting, schedule has already been out. However, when they go into these 7-day windows and these, 14-day windows in terms of selections, it would tend to look to me that Oklahoma and Texas will probably get their fair share of ESPN and ABC selections, whereas the Fox may get some of the other. So I think that'll remain to be seen. I think for the long term, certainly the Big 12 is in trouble. In terms of what they do. They're not going to be the same as what they were before, but I think over the next few months, I think it'll be interesting to see how that plays out. And I don't think we'll know anything until, heck, Mark, I could be wrong. We know something, 2 weeks from now, but I wouldn't think that we would know anything definitively from a win until, probably November-ish, October-ish. I've heard some people say that they think by the end of August we'll know exactly when this is going to happen. But I think that's the most interesting thing is, what does the Big 12 do in terms of do they stand pat through October, November, and really who blinks first?